Well, the pick is in, and it's Tim Walz. Is this the most left-wing presidential ticket we've seen in American history? Yes, it is. And we'll talk about it. We'll give you walls-to-walls coverage, in fact. And speaking of walls, are the walls already closing in on Tim Walz due to misrepresentations he's made about his military record? We'll dive deep into that, too. And do we have debates agreed upon? Maybe 3 debates, maybe 1 debate, maybe none. We'll find out what a Harris versus Trump debate will really look like. And are voters voting with their stomachs because they literally can't feed themselves due to inflation? We'll get into all those topics and more with the Roundtable. From Americans for Prosperity, Akash Chougule. From Job Creators Network, Elaine Parker. And from the Stigall Show podcast, Stigall. We're brought to you by AFP and JCN. My name's Larry O'Connor. It's time for the Roundtable. And we begin this week's Roundtable, as we always do, with Salem News Channel's This Week on the Hill. Speaker Johnson joined in to talk about the state of the presidential race. Let's take a look.
This could be a tight election, but what President Trump is doing, what the Republican Party is doing by his choice of J.D. Vance, I really think that's an effort at outreach. It's an effort to speak to hardworking families and middle-class folks in the Rust Belt and around the country. J.D. comes from very humble beginnings, of course. His life story is now famous. I think that was a good move, and I think what Kamala Harris did was cement her legacy as a far-left San Francisco radical. That's what we have on the ticket. Now they're going to try to keep her quiet. They're going to try to keep her in a basement. She'll go to rallies and she'll speak from a teleprompter, but she won't give any difficult interviews, if any at all. And I think if she goes off the teleprompter, they'll be very nervous about it because, you know, Kamala Harris has shown herself to be a failure in public policy and an empty suit in almost every regard.
Okay, well, it certainly does seem that the running mate choices are both trying to appeal to the same voters. And as you just heard from Speaker Johnson, it's that Rust Belt, small town, rural, manufacturing base kind of voter who has seen some tough times over the last several decades. Let's go straight to you, Elaine, because Job Creators Network, these are the people that you guys are trying to reach out to as well. Comparing Tim Walz and his approach from Minnesota versus J.D. Vance in Ohio, who do you think gets the better for those voters?
Well, I know that they have unveiled Tim Walz as some sort of savior and jobs guy and an amazing hero. But I read an article yesterday from the Wall Street Journal, and they took a look at his jobs plan in his state. And it's much like the federal level. Many of the jobs being created in Minnesota are actually taxpayer-funded government jobs. And that kind of papers over what's really happening at the state and federal level and in his state as well. I mean, you've got high income taxes in his state. You've got government red tape. You've got a war on energy. You've got a border problem. I mean, it's really just a microcosm of what's happening at the federal level. We had a jobs report last week of 114,000 jobs. 2/3 of those jobs were government jobs or quasi-government jobs, which are really funded by taxpayers. They're in the social services sector or healthcare. And the problem with those kinds of jobs is that they are not created from innovation and invention and lead to strong GDP and strong job growth and strong economy. They're funded by the government. And so if we want to be a European style economy, we are on the way. And so is Minnesota, frankly. But if we want to return to prosperity, we have to get inflation under control. We have to increase our domestic energy, and we have to stop the reckless spending.
Well, and Akash, Minnesota hasn't voted for a Republican president since 1972, Nixon. They couldn't even find a way to vote for Ronald Reagan. So this wasn't a play for Minnesota. This was a play for across the border in in Wisconsin. And I know that AFP's been on the ground since the Scott Walker days when they tried to take over the Capitol there. AFP was fighting the fight for the people of Wisconsin. Do you think the people that you guys are in touch with on a regular basis in Wisconsin are going to respond to the Minnesota way of building big government?
I don't think so, Larry. I'm very, very skeptical. Here's what I'll say about Tim Walz. It's not that I frankly think he has any appeal to that working class Rust Belt Midwest base. Who he does have some appeal to based on his electoral record in Minnesota are suburban moderates, right? Minnesota has a lot of those. It's a relatively well-to-do state. Minneapolis has a lot of sort of upper and upper middle class suburbs where Tim Walz has done quite well. I think that's where Democrats see their opportunity to make gains, because exactly the point that you made, the kind of people that populate states like Wisconsin and Minnesota, when you get outside of a Madison or a Milwaukee or a Minneapolis, those people are simply not buying what Tim Walz is selling. He is a far left progressive, no matter how much he might be a football coach or might dress like he's from the Midwest or anything like that. They see past, past all of the superficial stuff, and they know that he holds all the same positions as the San Francisco progressives who run the Democratic Party.
Yeah, assistant coach. He stole valor on the football field too. It's that bad. Chris Stigall, you do our morning show on our Salem station there in Philadelphia. They could have had Josh Shapiro. As a Republican, I was nervous she was going to pick Josh Shapiro, but she didn't. What does that say to the voters in Pennsylvania who are still up for grabs now?
Too Jewish, to borrow a line from Blazing Saddles. No, but in all seriousness, that's exactly it. I think everybody knows it. And, some suggested, though, Politico reported this week on Josh Shapiro that he's actually the one that bailed. I had kind of a contrarian opinion about Josh Shapiro. When everybody insisted he would be the smartest pick and the most brilliant pick, the thing you should know about Josh Shapiro is he has been humming Hail to the Chief since he was in his mother's womb. I mean, that's all he's ever imagined he would do, is be president of the United States. And in my view, if you took a look at Kamala Harris, and while she's elevated him on the national stage to join her ticket, what does that mean? You could potentially lose, or you win, and you're her number two for potentially a term or maybe two. I don't think if you see yourself as president one day, you want to be in that shadow. And you get back to Tim Walz. I thought it impossible that we're here, but I'm actually coming around to the conclusion some have been suggesting she may have been stuck with him. Like maybe everybody bailed on her and said, no, thanks, you're damaged goods, sister. And Walz was bat crap crazy enough to go, I'll take the gig. And she was stuck with him. It almost makes no sense that you would have someone as textbook perfect on paper as Josh Shapiro available to you, and you went with that lunatic. That's the only way I can see it.
But it's definitely the furthest left politically we've ever seen of a presidential ticket. Usually there's one of them is a lefty, the other one sort of offsets, like Obama, Biden, and Biden-Harris for that matter. So how does this play with those suburban voters in Pennsylvania, Chris? Do you think that Pennsylvania is going to be a fight right up until the bitter end?
It will. We have a really high profile Senate race, of course, as well. That it's a seat that Republicans are hopeful they'll pick up in Bob Casey. Of course, John Fetterman has been a unique problem in Pennsylvania because he's been running around very anti-Josh Shapiro, oddly, very pro-Israel at the same time, though. And in fact, Fetterman has been such a problem that James Carville just said, we've got to do something to whip him in shape and get him back in line. So there are a lot of disparate interests. Energy is a huge subject in Pennsylvania, of course, and construction jobs are down, even though they're up in other places. Manufacturing, energy production, the things that have made Pennsylvania's economy are down. So, and of course, not to speak of crime, real crime problems, immigration. So I think if the safety issue and the inflation issue continue to be hammered, I think it's a game to the end. Yeah.
And yet, Elaine, to pick up on Speaker Johnson's last point there has still been no legitimate, real tough question to Kamala Harris about why she has now suddenly reversed her position on fracking, or whether she really has reversed her position on fracking. She has not taken one question from the media. How big a role does the media play in protecting her from any kind of scrutiny? Because it seems to me there's a lot of questions that need to be answered by this candidate.
Absolutely. I'd like just one answered from her, because so far there's been nothing. I think that in her pick of Governor Walz, the Democratic Party basically gave the middle finger to any kind of moderate voters at all. It is a very far left ticket. For sure. But I really think that Republicans up and down the ticket can win on the policy issues alone. President Trump isn't just talking about what he will do as president. He can talk about what he has done as president and how he can fix things. We've seen Kamala Harris she doesn't even flip-flop herself. I mean, she's got her surrogates flip-flopping for her. That is the most pathetic form of flip-flopping I've actually ever seen. When you can't even stand by your own flip-flop, you know?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I do. I think we can win on policy alone.
Well, I agree, but Akash, and I know a lot of people are saying that Donald Trump, you know, and I think his press conference earlier this week was actually quite policy heavy. But if you go to her website right now, Kamala Harris still has no policies listed on it. They're not really leading with policy either. They're leading with this persona and this product, and the media seems to be protecting that strategy. How long will that last?
There's no question. I think this is an important distinction to make. It's not just that she needs to do an interview. She needs to do an actually substantive interview. It's not going to be enough to sit down with CNN and have them ask her, how evil is Donald Trump, right? We need to actually ask her in an adversarial setting what she believes, what she stands for. Does she still believe all of these things that she ran for president on? Does she agree with President Biden's platform? Does she agree with the bills that she led and co-sponsored? Does Governor Walz agree with the bills that he was a part of as a member of Congress? Does he agree with all the things that he signed into law as governor? I mean, these things are very, very important policy questions. Meanwhile, President Trump and J.D. Vance have got to, as we've discussed many times, Larry, stay focused, keep their eye on the ball. The issues that Chris and Elaine were alluding to, right? J.D. Vance, to his credit, did that earlier this week on Fox Business. He came out and answered what was an open question, I think, and he endorsed the Trump tax cuts. He endorsed the corporate tax cut. He said, you know, he acknowledged that they created jobs and grew the economy, grew wages. That is a concrete thing that we know the next administration wants to do with a Republican Congress, is build on tax reform. The American people know that. They appreciate that. We have no clue where Kamala Harris and Tim Walz stand on way, way too many issues, other than that we know that they are far left progressives down the line.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. We do know where they stand in terms of her being a San Francisco, California Democrat and all the policies she's embraced coming out of that state. And now with Tim Walz coming from Minnesota, the bluest of all blue states when it comes to presidential politics, I'm done with all the voters in America who tell me there's no difference, there's no real choice, both candidates are the same. No. I don't think we've ever had as stark a choice as we have this time. You can't hide behind that one anymore. You know, there are nearly 30 million small business owners in America, and they employ 60 million workers. No organization does a better job defending them on Capitol Hill and in states around the country than Job Creators Network. And never before have small business owners needed more defending. Heavy regulations, high inflation, higher interest rates, higher taxes, all caused by the policies of the Harris-Biden administration. They aren't just crushing hardworking American families. They're crushing hardworking small business owners across America, too, the lifeblood of our communities and a driving force of our economy. If you own a small business, if you work for a small business, or if you care about your local small business, you need to join the fight to support and defend them. Become a JCN freedom fighter. Just go to joinjcn.com. Now, there's no cost to you. Don't worry about that. But it's really going to help Main Street business across the country. Learn how you can support your local small businesses at no cost to you and defend that American dream. Go to joinjcn.com right now. In a wide-ranging 77-minute press conference at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump took all questions from all reporters about all subjects and revealed some news about potential debates with his adversary, Kamala Harris.
With all of that being said, I think it's very important to have debates. And we've agreed with Fox on a date of September 4th. We've agreed with NBC, fairly full agreement, subject to them, on September 10th. And we've agreed with ABC on September 25th. So we have those three dates, and those networks, they're very anxiously awaiting that date and those dates. So we have September 4th, September 10th, and September 25th. We have spoken to the heads of the network, and it's all been confirmed, other than some fairly minor details. Audience, some location, which city would we put it into, but all things that will be settled very easily. I think it'll be very easy. The other side has to agree to the terms. They may or may not agree. I don't know if they're going to agree. She hasn't done an interview. She can't do an interview. She's barely competent and she can't do an interview. But I look forward to the debates because I think we have to set the record straight.
That said, Kamala Harris at an event with the UAW was asked a question by a reporter, and she actually answered it, although it added to the confusion. Asked whether she would agree to those 3 debates as lined out by Donald Trump. Here was her answer.
Madam Vice President, Donald Trump agreed to 3 debates. Will you be participating in all 3?
I've always been on record. I am looking forward to debating Donald Trump. And we have a date of September 10th. I hear he is finally committed to it. I'm looking forward.
What about the other 2?
Let's make sure we get this done, however.
Now, here's what's confusing about that. The September 10th debate that she's agreed to, she didn't actually agree to it. Her predecessor, Joe Biden, agreed to it. That was supposed to be with Donald Trump on ABC. If you paid attention to what Donald Trump said, he said the September 10th debate will be on NBC. So was she talking about the debate on ABC, or did Donald Trump get it wrong and it's actually set for ABC? We don't know. The whole thing is still up in the air. Akash, last time Donald Trump debated his adversary, it was Joe Biden, and it was so bad for him, he dropped out. How do you think these debates are going to come by? And do you think that he's going to get all 3 of his debates?
If I were Donald Trump, I would use that old line, anytime, anywhere. There is no need for him to be afraid of debating Kamala Harris. Again, he rambles a lot. That press conference was very long, but if he trains up and practices and knows the issues he's supposed to be talking about, which I think he will come debate time, he will wipe the floor with Kamala Harris, not for any other reason than that her track record is horrendous and she has to defend this administration, and their policy track record is horrendous. And even more so is her role in it, which is that on all these big spending bills, Larry, $6 trillion in additional spending, Kamala Harris cast a tie-breaking vote to get it to President Biden's desk. All of these spending bills would not have happened. The inflation crisis would not have happened without the vote of Kamala Harris as vice president. It is literally that simple. I think that's all President Trump needs to get on the debate stage and talk about. And I think the American people are going to see a very, very stark choice.
Elaine, if the American people really do want a substantive policy-based debate, I think Donald Trump is there for it because the policies are on his side. And Akash is right. I mean, we saw Kamala Harris this week laughingly say that prices are still too high, and when she becomes president, it'll be her priority day one. Doesn't she have a job right now? Is she running against Joe Biden, Elaine?
What is she waiting for? She's been in office for 3.5 years. She could have started fighting inflation at any time, and she's going to wait until she gets elected president to start fighting inflation. I mean, it's crazy. I don't think that she is going to commit to more than one debate. I say that at a time. So the first one, if she loses, make no mistake, she will do another debate for sure. And I think she will lose. And my hope is that the terms of the debate are the same as they were with Biden, and that the mics are muted, because I don't think that Trump was ever more disciplined than in that debate with Biden. He let Biden sink himself. It's got to be the same strategy with her.
Yeah, I think you're right. And also, Chris, the more you let your opponent talk, generally speaking, it actually, they hang themselves. And if he does try to talk over her, she's going to do that thing. I saw you mentioning it earlier this week. She'll do the I'm speaking thing. That's her go-to. It's her trump card. I'm speaking.
Yeah. And by the way, that plays really well with the anti-Semite pro-Palestinian crowd. Just shout at them, I'm speaking. They're very impressed by your feminism. Rock on. No, I think the cut mic strategy, as Elaine said, is an interesting one, and maybe even why the networks will go, that worked out too well for him. We might go back to just leaving them open, because as Akash said, some people are critical of Donald Trump because he strays. And if you let him go and wind him up, he'll just keep going. I will say, to his credit, and as Akash mentioned, J.D. Vance in the last segment, these two guys did something so brilliant this week, and I don't think it was given nearly the credit it was due. Albeit the minute she gave it, she was smoked out, basically. They shamed her, and they shamed the press that covers her into forcing the conversation that she's not doing media. You got Van Jones talking about it now on CNN. You've got Politico writing about it. The New York Times writing about it today. Those things were not being discussed until J.D. Vance and Donald Trump did these events where, Vance strolls down the runway to her plane and Trump holds this press conference. Now everyone's discussing that she's not talking. And in my view, that's the win of the week.
Yeah. In fact, you even saw Nancy Pelosi, and I think it was the New York Times today, writing articles saying, yeah, she's not giving interviews. And that's smart. They're actually praising her for not giving interviews. It's part of her strategy. But with regard to debates, are you with the rest of the panel here? I think it's a very smart thing to press on 3, because I got to tell you, I think Kamala Harris is a performer. I think she's playing a role that's been scripted for her, and she's got talent there. She can actually deliver a line. She can work on timing pretty well. I think she can muster enough to deliver one solid debate. But if there are 3 debates, I think that the cracks start to show, and that's where you actually see the real Kamala Harris. What do you think, Chris?
She's also really hateful. I mean, to be very honest, like you can see it. You can see it when she got upset at those pro-Palestinian protesters at her rally. She gets this angry scowl, much like Hillary did. I can imagine Trump saying, what a nasty person you are. I can imagine it coming, because she is. I mean, her staffers, what's her turnover rate in her staff? 90-something% have bailed on her. She's known to be persnickety, to put it mildly. I think she not only cracks because she doesn't know what she's talking about, genuinely. That's not a sexist dig. There are plenty of brilliant women in politics. She just doesn't happen to be one of them. She literally doesn't know what she's talking about. And, you know, one thing that I wrote in my newsletter this week, Larry, I stole it straight from the most brilliant commentator there ever was, Rush Limbaugh. He created what he called the Limbaugh theorem during the Obama era. And if you remember what that was, Rush pointed out that Obama creates this cesspool of policy, all this destruction and ruin, and then talks above it, runs against it, acts like he's the outsider, and she's doing the exact same thing. The Limbaugh theorem applies again. She's trying to run as if she didn't have anything to do with this, and their policies don't create it. And I don't know if she's going to get away with it like Obama did, but that's exactly what they're trying.
Yeah, it's been, 3 full weeks now since she was placed in there by very powerful Democrat politicians and very wealthy donors as the nominee without one vote. She still hasn't given an interview. She hasn't given a press conference. And now she's only agreeing to 1 of 3 potential debates. How long will it last? We'll keep watching. For 2 decades now, conservatives have chosen to partner with Americans for Prosperity to expand freedom and opportunity. AFP's grassroots movement has been delivering real, tangible results at the local, state, and national level to improve the lives of millions by lowering taxes, removing burdensome regulations, and expanding school choice, just to name a few wins. With more than 4 million advocates and local offices across the country, Americans for Prosperity is the largest, most effective grassroots organization in America. Now, AFP is taking on Bidenomics or Kamalanomics, Harrisnomics. They're taking on the horrible policies of this administration, and they're fighting to secure the border. See how you can join the movement to reignite the American dream. Go to americansforprosperity.org. That's americansforprosperity.org. Kamala Harris has done several rallies now, and some smart observers have noticed a pattern of behavior. Take a look.
It's good to be back in Wisconsin. It is so good to be back in Michigan. Listen, let me tell you, I am clear. The path to the White House runs right through this state. And listen, I am clear. The path to the White House runs right through this state. I took on perpetrators of all kinds. I took on perpetrators of all kinds and had a summer job at McDonald's. I had a summer job at McDonald's. So hear me when I say, Detroit, when I say, I know Donald Trump's type. I know Donald Trump's type. And are we ready to fight for it? And are we ready to fight for it? And when we fight, we win.
Now, that's pretty bad, but I know a lot of you think, it's a stump speech and they're politicians and that's typical. I mean, sure, same day, same suit, neighboring states, that's going to happen, right? Okay, then how do you explain this?
Many of you know, before I was elected vice president, many of you know then, before I was elected vice president, as many of you know, before I was elected vice president, as many of you know, before I was elected vice president, as many of you know, before I was elected as vice president or elected a United States senator, I was an elected attorney general, and before I was elected United States Senator. I was an elected Attorney General. Before I was elected as a United States Senator, I was elected Attorney General. And before I was elected a United States Senator, I was an elected Attorney General. Before I was elected as United States Senator, I was the elected Attorney General. I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women. I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women. I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women. I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abuse women. I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women. I know Donald Trump's type. 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 I know Donald Trump's type.
Yeah, good job from the editors over at Breitbart there. Elaine, this is honestly a remarkable thing to see. It's not like she's been on the campaign trail very long. She only started doing rallies about, 9 days ago, I think. And it's the same scripted event with the same mannerisms, the same hand gestures. The casual political observer would see a product that's being sold to us.
That's a good analogy. I think what this does is reinforce my earlier comments that a Harris administration is simply going to be a redux of the current failed policies that the American people are living under right now. And that's a war on our domestic energy, a war on our small businesses, reckless government spending that has led to historic inflation, a cost of living crisis that are hurting everyday ordinary Americans. She doesn't have another playbook. It is the Democrat playbook. And that's what we're going to see in a Harris administration.
Yeah, but at least, you use the playbook analogy. Football teams mix it up a little bit. The opening drive from Sunday to Sunday is going to be somewhat different. Otherwise, the defense knows exactly what you're going to do. Akash, this is, I was stunned when I saw these videos because it's so blatant, it's so obvious. And yet you don't hear a lot of commentary about the fact of how scripted this politician is.
No, you don't. And again, I think that's part of her plan, right? That exactly Biden's kind of sat in the basement. She's going to be very scripted, read from the teleprompter, do what works, lead into her strengths. But Larry, here's the thing. The average voter in these swing states might see that speech one time, right? Or they might see one clip one time on social media before the November election. And so I think for conservatives, for us to go after the media and go after her for repeating her stump speech is not going to be the path to victory. I think what Elaine is alluding to is the substance of what she is saying. What is she campaigning on, right? It's not even just the flip-flops. It's the Biden record and how the Harris, plan is the Biden record on steroids. You don't like an open border. You don't like inflation. Well, you're certainly not going to like all of those things on steroids. And that's what you're going to get, not only if she's elected, but if you elect her lackeys down ballot in Congress and the Senate, like Bob Casey, right? John Tester, Sherrod Brown, all these Democrats running for House seats. These people are all trying to distance themselves from Joe Biden. But at the end of the day, the platform they're getting behind, the person at the top of their ticket, is Bidenomics on steroids.
I hear you about that, but I also think when you're voting for president, I think the American people have shown over the years that they also vote for the person. I think that how that person comes across is a big part of motivating their vote too. And Chris, we don't live in the 3-network Dan Rather world of delivering the news anymore. I think that because of social media, people will see exactly what's going on here with this candidate.
I do too. And while I agree with Akash, I don't think we can complain about the media to victory. I will say that I think people sniff a phony. I think. Now, I may be a little rose-colored glasses on this, but I talked with Selena Zito from the Washington Examiner, who, knows Pennsylvania like the back of her hand. And I said, what's your sense of this? And by the way, I don't think she's any kind of Trump homer by any means. And she said, Chris, I think this is as close to the Hillary Clinton versus Trump model as anything we've ever seen. She thinks that people see her like they saw Hillary Clinton, maybe worse, because she is so vacuous, she is so empty, she is so lacking in substance, and she's not particularly likable. I will be very curious to see how men, particularly men of color, particularly the men of color that she jailed, she has a really nasty track record. People don't like her. People don't trust her. She doesn't come off as particularly smart. She's a phony. She's putting on that stupid fake accent just the way Hillary used to. I agree with Akash. I agree with you. I think people see and spot a phony. And, Trump, the name calling, okay, fine. But to say fake and keep driving home fake, 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 she is fake. Fight, fight, fight. I fight, fight, fight. You're fake, fake, fake. She is. I dig it.
Akash, one thing that isn't phony is definitely the fact that she's going to be replicating the Biden policies and probably, as you said, on steroids. I think energy is the real key here. You could tell that Joe Biden didn't really have his heart in the whole fracking ban thing back 4 years ago. She's a true believer. And just on energy independence, Akash, I think that's a winning message for the Trump campaign to try to pick up on and really hammer home for those voters that are going to make a difference.
There's no question about it. Do you remember March of 2021, the American Rescue Plan Act passed, again, with Kamala Harris, tie-breaking vote. She barnstormed around the country saying, help is on the way, help is on the way. She and Nancy Pelosi. Help came down the way. A couple months later, it was $5 a gallon gas. That is what Kamala Harris wants to do on energy prices. She's been very clear. Again, she's a big believer in the California textbook far-left playbook on this. They want to force everybody into electric cars. And that's simply not going to play in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. So if that's the defining issue of this election, she's in big trouble. We just have to make sure that it is one of the defining issues.
Yeah, and Elaine, as we saw from the market reaction early this week to the jobs report we reported on here on the roundtable last Friday, this is hardly a stable economy to kind of run as, an incumbent 4 more years. Do you think Kamala Harris is, in fact, should she be treated as an incumbent? Because you saw, I mentioned earlier, she's trying to distance herself from the very administration policies she's part of.
Yeah, she's been introduced to us as some new candidate on the scene and who's an outsider, and she's not. To Chris's point about what Rush would say, I mean, she's simply not a new candidate on the scene. She's talking about what she's going to do when she's president. She has been part of the administration that has led to these policies. I actually disagree that this is not going to be about how people perceive personality. I don't think this is going to be a personality contest at all. It is going to come down to those issues, those pocketbook issues. I think Trump said people were going to vote on their stomachs yesterday, and which I found interesting because we usually say they're going to vote with their wallets. But stomachs makes a lot of sense because when you go to the grocery store, you can't afford groceries anymore.
Indeed. In fact, that comment from Donald Trump is going to be the centerpiece of one of our segments coming up. So keep it here. Watching the roundtable from Town Hall Media. Within 24 hours of the selection of Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, as Kamala Harris's running mate, a part of his military record came quickly into question. J.D. Vance in particular seized on a statement that Governor Walz had made in support of infringing on people's Second Amendment rights by saying that weapons of war that he had carried in war should not be on the streets. But of course, Mr. Walz didn't carry weapons in war. He was deployed to Italy to provide security for some American bases as the fight was going on in Afghanistan. Then questions came up as to whether he misrepresented his rank when he retired and whether he left the National Guard knowing that his unit was about to be deployed to Iraq. All of those questions are being discussed. But what happened yesterday on CNN is noteworthy all in and of itself, because J.D. Vance, a Marine who was deployed to Iraq, has been leading the criticism of Mr. Walz. And anchor Breonna Taylor decided that she wanted to push back a little bit on the running mate of Donald Trump. Take a look.
I also think that J.D. Vance, as a messenger on this, may be an imperfect messenger, because we have, as you introduced him, as a combat correspondent, which was what his title was. But when you dig a little deeper into that, he was a public affairs specialist, someone who did not see combat, which certainly the title combat correspondent kind of gives you a different impression. So he may be the imperfect messenger on that.
So in other words, Breonna Taylor is saying something that even Tim Walz and Kamala Harris wouldn't venture to say, that, J.D. Vance's military record is nothing to shout home about. Vance took to Elon Musk's X platform and pushed back, said, Brianna, this is disgusting, and you and your entire network should be ashamed of yourself. When I got the call to go to Iraq, I went. Tim Walz said he carried a gun in a war. Did he? No, it was a lie. And if I may add to that, this is the tombstone of Major Megan McClung at Arlington National Cemetery. She was killed in action in Iraq. As you can see, she had the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star with Operation Iraqi Freedom. She was the first woman to be a casualty of the Iraq War. She was also the first female graduate of the United States Naval Academy to ever die in combat. And she was a public affairs officer. Her job was the same job that J.D. Vance had. In fact, she died in Iraq when her vehicle, escorting Newsweek journalists in the war zone, met with a roadside bomb. The journalists were unharmed, but she died while she was protecting and escorting those journalists, the very colleagues of CNN's Breonna Keeler. This was so wrong, what CNN did, what Breonna Keeler did, but it tells you exactly where things stand now in the political discourse in America and how the media plays a role in it. And I'm going to start with Chris Stigall on this one because I know he shares many of my sentiments about the media. But you say she didn't have to do that. Breonna Keeler could actually step back and let the politicians fight this one out. But she decided not just to take Tim Walz's side in this because she can't. There's nothing she can say about Tim Walz. The facts are facts. But instead, she tried to disparage J.D. Vance. And that's as low as you can go, I think.
Yeah, Brianna's upset because CNN questioned if she was the best messenger to deliver their morning show and lost her job recently, I think. No one watches her. And she was summarily fired. So she's been demoted to middays delivering this pablum. Yeah, she's a loathsome creature, to be sure. But you know what this brought to mind? And you just brought up that fallen hero, Megan. And her escorting journalists around. Once upon a time, not only was what Breonna Keeler considered loathsome, what she said loathsome, do you remember Brian Williams, who once anchored the esteemed nightly news, and why he ultimately was dispatched from that broadcast? It was because he totally lied about being fired upon while covering the Iraq War, when people that were helicoptering him in and out of a war zone said none of that ever happened. He would tell this story on Letterman, and people caught him and said, why are you telling this story? And he ultimately said, well, you know, I embellish things, and the NBC suspended him, and then he was sent back to MSNBC like on parole or something, and now has vanished from the earth. I don't even know where he went. But not long ago, the press thought it pretty remarkable to lie about being fired upon even when you're not in the military. So imagine now how far we've fallen that you would defend Tim Walz and disparage the legitimate service of someone if you're somebody like Breonna Keeler.
Yeah, it's a good point. And Akash, listen, I did not serve. I'm trying to stay out of this fight. I wish Breonna Keeler and other journalists would do the same. But if the Tim Walz selection was to appeal to sort of the blue collar, rural sort of voter, that's exactly what they've telegraphed. I don't know if this military record thing is going to do the trick for them.
No, I mean, I'm of the opinion Tim Walz is kind of a nothing burger in every kind of sense imaginable. He doesn't really do anything for Kamala Harris, as Chris was talking about previously. But this is pretty concerning. Stolen valor, I mean, that is horrific. I mean, we've all flown into Washington Reagan Airport, and when you look out to your left, you see the Washington Monument and all these beautiful things. But I think the real beauty of our country lies when you look out the right side of that plane over Arlington Cemetery, and there are thousands and thousands of headstones like Megan McClung's. Those are the real heroes who are the reason we have the country that we do. And so to disparage anyone's service in Iraq or Afghanistan the way that the CNN anchor did, I think it's just so beyond shameful. And it's also shameful to lie about doing anything like that. And if that is in fact what Governor Walz did, I think that's very, very concerning. And frankly, I think should be a defining aspect of his candidacy. We know that he's a far left progressive in line with the San Francisco liberals, and his track record as governor deserves to be dissected. But as far as the kind of person that he is, if this is in fact something he was dishonest about, it is something the American people deserve to know and factor into their vote.
Well said. You know, he has continued to claim that he retired as a command sergeant major when in fact he didn't officially achieve that rank, since he didn't serve out the final part of his term. That means he actually retired as a master sergeant. The Harris campaign have now updated their website to reflect that adjustment. So that's an acknowledgement that this was first misrepresented by Mr. Walz. And if I could, Elaine, I think ultimately this is a reflection of Kamala Harris. You know, when you're a candidate for president, your first major decision, and it's all your choice, is who your running mate's going to be. What does this tell us about Kamala Harris's wisdom, judgment, and ability to vet people as she's actually selecting her team?
Well, let's be clear. Kamala Harris was probably not part of any of this election. There are people behind her pulling the strings and making the decisions on who she runs with, what she says, where she says it, and how often she says it. So she's not making these decisions at all. There's no way she made any of these decisions. He doesn't bring anything to the ticket at all. And I'll further add that the last time we saw a Democratic candidate be dishonest about their military record, his name was John Kerry. And I think we know how all of that ended. The American people did not take kindly to someone lying about their military record.
Yeah, well said. And by the way, the most passionate people speaking out against John Kerry's aggrandizement of his military record were his fellow sailors in the Navy there who served with him in Vietnam. And of course, we're seeing really the same thing happen here with fellow soldiers from the Minnesota National Guard. It'll be fascinating to see this one develop, but it ain't going away. It's not going away anytime soon. One noteworthy moment from President Trump's lengthy press conference at Mar-a-Lago had to do with his perspective on what he thinks this election is really ultimately going to be about. And it's quite revealing. Let's take a look.
The polls have suggested. There are some polls that say we're going to win in a landslide. People are voting with their stomachs, meaning they're going to the grocery store. They're paying 50, 60, 70% more for food than they did just a couple of years ago. Look at what's happened to energy. Look at what's happened not only to their cars, where gasoline's gone from $1.87, and we had moments when it was below that, but it's gone from $1.87 to $5, $6, and $7. And they take the strategic national reserves and they take it out, even though it's peanuts compared, it doesn't last long. But they're virtually empty now. We've never had it this low. And he's using that to keep the gasoline prices as low as possible. He's sucked all of the oil out, essentially the gasoline, to keep the price down a little bit, and it's had very little impact. But you know what? We have no strategic national reserves now. He's emptied it. It's almost empty. It's never been this low. And I had it at a good level, and I would have had it more if the Democrats would have approved the deal. You know, I had a deal to buy it at $22 a barrel, and now it's going to be close to 100 pretty soon, my opinion. And the Democrats didn't want to do that, but we bought a lot anyway, and we had it pretty good. And what they've done to the national reserves, the strategic national reserves, is, as you know very well, because you cover it, but what they've done is incredible. They've just, for the sake of getting some votes, for the sake of having gasoline, you know, that's meant for wars. It's meant for like tragedy. It's not meant to keep a gasoline price down so that somebody can vote for Biden, or in this case, Kamala, who, by the way, is worse than Biden. And she's actually not as smart. Okay? She's actually not as smart. That's hard to believe, isn't it?
All right, Akash, up until that last little swipe at Kamala, I was thinking you could have written this moment for Donald Trump. That's got to be exactly what you think he's got to hammer home at debates, at speeches, every opportunity.
There is no question about it. That was rock solid on energy policy, right? The strategic production reserve stuff, it is so amazing. It's like hard to believe how poorly the administration has handled this. It's exactly what President Trump said. I would add one more point, right? President Biden did all this stuff for green energy, trillions of dollars, electric vehicle policies, and all this other stuff. All the while, he's drawing down the strategic production reserve and begging Venezuela and Iran to increase natural gas production. So he has done actually nothing to move us away from fossil fuels, if that was your goal. All he did is take it out of the strategic preserve and ask countries that do it more dirty and more dangerously than we do to increase their production. And so President Biden has been a complete failure on energy policy. And I think the latter part of what President Trump was talking about right there is really vital to understand, given the state of the world today. Because of President Biden's foreign policy failures, the world is much more volatile and much more unsafe than it was a few years ago. The strategic production reserve is for exactly that scenario of wartime, of sort of global calamity. We're in a very treacherous situation that should things really hit the fan, we do not have enough reserves in there because the strategic reserve is meant for instances like that. It's not meant to keep your poll numbers high because you let gas prices get too high because of your bad energy policy.
Yeah.
I think President Trump has got to hammer that message home over and over again, particularly in Pennsylvania.
Well, and add to that the fact that 3 of the countries who benefit the most from higher global energy prices are Russia. It's funding their war on Ukraine. Iran, it's funding their war through proxies all through the Middle East. And it's Venezuela, funding the dictator Maduro to hold on to power. Elaine, though, I do love the framing that people are voting with their stomachs. You know, when the economy is bad, people make choices about whether they should buy a new car or maybe not go on that vacation. People are literally having to make choices at the grocery store because it's so bad right now.
Yeah, so there's a nifty little thing going around TikTok right now. I'm not on TikTok. I'm not a fan of TikTok. But of course, like most people's children, both my kids are, and my daughter is in her junior year in college and living on a budget. And so what she told me is going around on TikTok, and everybody is doing, is they're going back to their their Walmart and grocery store receipts online, and they're hitting buy again from their receipts from 2021, and they're hitting buy again. And when they do that, it takes the exact same products, you know, whether you bought 20 products or 40 products and what those prices are, and you see what you paid in 2021, and then you look at what you would pay in 2024. And so you're seeing prices. She did it herself, and she said, oh my gosh, I paid $127 for this same groceries in 2021. And if I bought it today, it would be $250. I mean, so they are seeing in real time and real numbers exactly what's happening. Nobody can gaslight that. Nobody can wallpaper over that. People are not able to make ends meet.
Yeah, the Trump people should actually do an ad focused exactly on that. Although, are you telling the truth, Elaine? Haven't I seen you doing one of those viral renegade dances on TikTok? I'm sure I have.
Don't tell anybody.
I thought so. Chris, voting with your stomachs. I mean, Trump has a way with words, and this gets right to the heart of the issue.
It's funny. I was at the gas pump just yesterday, and I don't know if you can see this, but I took a picture of it. This was stuck on my light there.
I can fix that. That's great. That's new. I haven't seen those.
So for people that can't see it, it was a sticker on the gas pump right next to the price of the gas, and it's Trump pointing, and it says, "I can fix that." That is a related sticker. When Biden had just won election, you might have seen those popping up on pumps around town that said, "I did that." When prices started to go ever higher. People feel that more than anything else. He's exactly right to hammer it. Akash is exactly right. The one reality that you cannot escape is that, you know, to fill my truck, I'm over $100. And by the way, I know I'm getting away cheap with where I am. Groceries, same deal. I just had a story this week on the show that said back to school time, and there are families deciding whether they're going to buy groceries or buy back to school items. That is something Kamala Harris cannot escape. And I don't know if everyone's going to necessarily be vocal, particularly moms who are doing a lot of that purchasing. I get this sense, maybe I'm overly optimistic, there will be a lot of people that know what is real, may not feel inclined to be honest that they're about to do it, but know something has to change, and they'll go quietly cast their vote for Donald Trump, but never admit it. That shy Trump voter that we once talked about,
yes,
I think they've been beaten into submission now. That's yeah. I'm guessing, but I think that could be real.
You know, you're right that Kamala Harris can't escape it, but it's even stranger. She's actually sort of campaigning against it. Take a look at this clip from her rally in Wisconsin.
As while our economy is doing well by many measures, prices for everyday things like groceries are still too high. You know it and I know it. You know, when I was Attorney General, I went after price fixing schemes. And when I am president, it will be a day one priority to fight to bring down prices. I will take on big corporations that engage in illegal price gouging. I will take on corporate landlords that unfairly raise rents on working families. I will take on big pharma and cap the cost of prescription drugs for all Americans.
All right, so Akash, help me out here. First of all, what's stopping her from doing those things right now? She's acting like Joe Biden is the problem because he's not doing those things. All right, set that aside for a second. That's why prices are too high, because corporations are price gouging, because of big pharma, because of corporate landlords. That's not why we've got $5 dozen eggs, Akash. It's government policy that's the problem.
There's no question about it. And they have this like antitrust enforcement thing because they think there's collusion among grocery stores. There are so many different brands of grocery stores in this country, so many different brands of food inside the grocery store. This whole idea that like greedflation is driving the price of high groceries and food is so insane. AFP actually just put out a report debunking this. This is a claim being pushed by Bob Casey, Democrat senator of Pennsylvania. He's the leading cheerleader for this, and it is complete BS, Larry. This is complete BS that corporations are the reasons for high food prices. I mean, were corporations this wonderful philanthropic entity when food prices were low 3 years ago before the inflation crisis? I didn't hear Democrats say a word about that at the time. They're gaslighting us, they're lying to us, and they're deflecting from their own track record, which is that they spent $6 trillion of additional funds when they had full control and tens of thousands of pages of regulations. Those are the things driving up food prices, gas prices, energy prices, healthcare prices, home prices, and everything else under the sun. And there's no one else to blame other than President Biden, Kamala Harris, and the Democrats in Congress who voted for it.
Yeah, and Elaine, as a TikTok influencer, of course, you know the meme of the guy in the hot dog suit who's saying, we're trying to find the guy who did this. She's the one who did this. She literally cast the vote that drove prices high, and now she's campaigning saying prices are too high.
She literally and her team literally thinks that their voters are stupid. That's the only thing I can conclude, is that they have zero respect for their voters if they think they're that stupid, that they think this is all about corporate greed and nothing about inflation. I mean, there's a cost of living crisis out there, and it's not about corporate greed. You cannot continue to operate in an environment as a business where you're paying more for your goods and services and not pass those prices on to consumers. That is happening as a result of bad government policy. And if we have another Harris administration, we're going to see the same kind of double down on reckless government spending and an even bigger war on our domestic energy production. And that is going to continue to drive the cost of everything higher.
Yeah, their economic policy is more of the same, if not much more of the same. But Chris, there was something kind of dark that I noticed in this, and maybe you picked up on it too. I've never heard this before, that inflation's bad, prices are too high, and I'm going to use my power in the executive branch to prosecute companies to fix it. She talks about the power of prosecution a lot. I understand she was a DA and then an attorney general. But there's something unnerving hearing somebody who wants the most power you can have in an executive role in this country and talk about her constantly flexing and using that power to harm people she thinks are doing something wrong.
Yeah, call up your neighborhood Catholics and see what they have to say about that under Merrick Garland right now, or maybe anybody who was in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. They love the power of lawfare. We've seen it play out. You're exactly right to bring it up. I know Trump won't whine about that. That's the one thing he won't really talk about much, but it is the thing that I think they want away from as fast as possible, because it is the thing that I think makes him maybe the most compelling to the American citizen right now. Donald Trump himself is the personification of the victimization of this government. So many of us, for various reasons, whether it's being rousted out of our homes for being a pro-life protester or just in Washington on January 6th, or the victims of inflation and gas prices at the grocery store and the gas pump, or whether it's our firearms, or whether it's the IRS, or whether it's being spied on by the FBI at school board meetings. We have been getting the back of the hand of this government as the citizenry for some time now. She's the embodiment of it. And Donald Trump is the embodiment of those of us who feel like we're last place. And we're, Joe Biden said it. You want to take on the government, you're going to need a fighter jet.
Yeah.
I think Donald Trump nearly being killed and the lawfare he's faced, his home raided. I kind of wish he'd lean into that a little bit, because I actually think that makes him a pretty sympathetic figure with a lot of voters who feel equally abused.
Yeah, well said. And I think that you might say it is pretty remarkable, if I could, on this Friday, the 9th day of August, as we're doing the LARRY Roundtable, that it's been just 4 weeks from tomorrow that we had an assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life. And now it seems like so many in the media are not paying much attention to it at all. It sort of seems like a big story still. We're still learning a lot more about that. And you're right, Chris. I think that there is an unnerving feeling in this country. And that statement from Kamala Harris, that was also a message to corporations. It was a message to CEOs. You better get on my good side. You better be a part of what I'm doing here if you don't want me coming after you. It's an insidious use of power and projection of power. And well, it kind of goes against what we the people have ever wanted from our federal government.